Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 7 of Pulumi for IT Pros. This week we're going to tackle something that is probably the most difficult concept you will need to grasp when using Pulumi, particularly coming from a non-developer background, and that's the apply function. It's something that's fairly unique to Pulumi, and it's a bit of a payoff for getting the benefits of using all these programming languages. There's this little extra complexity around the apply method that you need to understand to be able to work with more complex processes within Pulumi. So I'm going to try and explain it the best I can. Hopefully it makes sense. If you've got any questions or want to discuss it any further, just drop a message in the video chat. I'm happy to go over it again, but hopefully this will make some sense by the end of the video, and you can at least try it out. And to be honest, the best way to deal with this is to do it yourself and try it and see what happens, and it'll hopefully make a bit more sense. But let's delve into what is apply, why do we care, and what's it going to do. Okay, so back over in VS Code, and we've got the resources we created before. We're not going to create any more resources in today's video. We're going to have a look at using the outputs of those. So a very simple scenario. We've got this resource group we're creating here. I want to log a message in the log when we do the deployment with the resource group name. So your initial thought, and it was mine, would probably be to do this. Also, we'll use the print function within Python. In C#, it would be console.write or whatever your language supports. But we're going to do that, and we want to print the resource group name. Simple. That, you would think, would be the end of that. Let's go over to the command line, and let's run Pulumi up, and what we should see is the name getting printed. As you can expect, it would be a very short video if that worked, so it's not going to work. Let's have a look at this. There you go. So we get this error here. It's calling string on an output T is not supported. Get the value of an output, consider using apply. What does that mean? Okay, so let's head back to VS Code. And if we hover over resource group.name, and my IntelliSense isn't doing its job today, which is unfortunate. Can we get it from anywhere else? Okay, but resource group.name, the type of this is output string. So it's not a string, it's an output string. So in programming language terms, you would write that as output string. And it's how you do it in C#. I'm not actually sure how it would look in Python, but similar sort of thing. So effectively, this is what we call T, which is just a sort of marker, but in our case, it's string. Basically, the type is output, and then there's a sort of inner type of string, and this could be int or whatever we wanted it to be, whatever the particular resource name, resource type was. So you can see here that actually printing this resource group name isn't going to work because this isn't a string. Print expects a string, and it's not getting one, it's getting a output string. Now, why is that the case? Type of output is a Pulumi specific type. It's a thing that's been invented by Pulumi for this. And the reason for that is that when you define these resources, so when we define that resource group, for example, it doesn't exist. When I write the code the very first time, that resource group doesn't actually exist in Azure. Not until I've run it for the first time does that resource group exist. And so the problem you've got is if you've got other resources who want to use that resource group name or whatever, then they are expecting that to exist because we don't know the value until it exists. For resource group names, obviously, we can probably work it out. But for other things, other types of resource properties, we won't know what they are until they exist. And so this output type is what in programming language terms you would refer to as a promise. It's to say this will have a value in it at some point. I can't tell you right now what the value is, and I can't necessarily tell you when it's going to have a value, but at some point it will have a value. It's eventually consistent is a term that's used with that. And so the problem we come here when we try to print this, that it's not that type and it may or may not have a value, and we need to be able to deal with that and translate it back into the native type, which in this case is string. Now, again, you might think, okay, can you not just do the toString method, or in Python's case, just the string method around it and wrap that? If we go to the command line and run that, you can guess what might happen, but you basically get the same problem. It can't convert output to a string because the language itself doesn't know how to make sure that has a value in it. So what we need to do is use apply. And so apply is a special function within Pulumi which basically says, go and get that value now. If you need to create a resource, go and create the resource so that the value I've asked for actually has a value in it. It's no longer a promise to give that value. It is the actual value. Now, you don't need to use apply if you're feeding those output values into a Pulumi resource. So we talk about here, we've got this resource group resource, and then in the storage account, we feed this resource group.name in here. And you can see there's no apply method there. I'm just feeding in the straight output. That's because this is a Pulumi resource and it knows what to do with things of type output. It will go and basically do that all for you transparently. You won't have to deal with it. The only time we need to think about using apply is really two scenarios. The first is where we're trying to use it in something outside of Pulumi, so just native Python methods, those sort of things we're going to see here. The other is if we want to manipulate that value before we then use it in a Pulumi resource. And we'll talk about the second one in a minute, but we'll focus on the first one first. So in our scenario here, where we want to output the resource group name, what we want to do is actually go resource group dot, then dot apply. Now, this uses a functionality in Python called Lambda functionality. It's different in other languages, but for Python, it is called Lambda. And you don't need to know an awful lot about this, so don't worry too much. Effectively, though, what it gives you is a method that has a value inside the method that you can use for other things. So you need to use the keyword Lambda, and then you give it a name. So we RG name and then a colon. And so this basically says, when we run this apply function, go and populate the resource, in our case, the resource group, so that the name property is populated, and store the name property in this RG name variable, which is inside our method. The reason for that is because what apply actually returns is still an output. So you can't do something like RG name equals that, and then do print G name. That won't work. You get the same problem because RG name is an output. And this is something you need to get your head around, is there is no real way to translate an output string, for example, or any type, but just output string in this example, into a string that you can use in the rest of your application. Where you need that type in a string type, you have to do the work inside the apply method. So to give you an example, with our method, we want to print this out. So we're going to run the print function inside this apply Lambda, and that's one of the benefits of using the Lambda piece, is you can do methods inside of it. And so we are going to print, and we're going to add some just text, resource group name, and then concatenate RG name. And RG name here is a string. We can treat it exactly like a string because it is a string inside this method. Okay, so if we go to the command line and we run that this time, what we should now see is it works. It outputs that string for us. So there we go. You can see resource group name, Pulumi for IT Pros. I missed a colon, but you can see that's working. So if we go back in here, I'm just going to fix this to make it more readable. Run that again. But you can see what's going on there. Inside that apply method, you can just use your normal programming language methods to deal with that. And so you can do whatever you want in there. We're using the print function, but let's say we want to actually do something a bit more complicated. And this varies how you do this depending on the language. So within C#, you could actually do all of your logic within the Lambda function, within this method, and have multiple lines of code within that. In Python, as far as I can understand it, that doesn't really work in the same way because you can't have multi-line lambdas. But what you can do with the Python piece is still we can declare a function. So this is just a sort of separate block of code. So use the def keyword to create the function, and we're going to call it print resource name, and it's going to accept a string for the resource. And again, with Python, it's got a colon, then it tabbed in for the method in here. So we're just going to do print and then append resource name. So that's basically doing the same thing, but you can see here, obviously you can have multiple lines in this. So let's add another print in here, created on, and then we'll just do date.today. And that should work, I think. So if we go back to we need to then change this. So we change our method from, instead of using that print function, we're going to use this print resource name function, and we're going to pass it in the RG name thing from the Lambda. And what should happen now, if we go over to the command line, just know about that, is that should now run our function. And the key thing to remember is that function is now running inside of that Lambda, except obviously I neglected to actually convert that to a string because it's a date. So let's go back to that. That should do it, I think. Yeah. All the code that's inside my function is outputting or is running inside of that Lambda resource. And therefore, the actual Pulumi value that I've run apply on is available to me as its native type, in this case, a string. I just forgot to put the today method on the end and wrap it in a string. So once I've fixed all that up, so if we go back to the command line, you can see now that's printed with the correct date. But the important thing there is the fact that this whole method, this print resource name, has a run inside this apply method. And so what it's been given is actually a string. And so if you need to do some complex things within an apply method, you can do that. In some languages, you can do that directly within the apply method. In some, like Python, you probably need to break it out into a separate function and then call that function. But you can do that. Now, to be aware, obviously, that this using apply a lot in your code is a bit of a code smell. It's maybe you're not doing something quite right, but sometimes it's absolutely necessary. If you're doing a lot of work where you're manipulating Pulumi resources outside of Pulumi or using their data, then it's really common to need to use an apply. So a common example there is if you're trying to talk directly to the Azure API. There's something you can't do in Pulumi, or you need to do it in a different way, and you need to talk directly to Azure to do that. So you're using normal Python to make a REST call to the API, and you need some values from some Pulumi resources. You're probably going to have to wrap that in an apply because the REST API call expects a string and you've got an output, so you need to do that. So yeah, there are valid reasons to using it, but just make sure that you're not peppering it all over your code for the sake of it. It's a sort of specific use case. The other use case I mentioned before is around where you need to put it into an actual resource, where you need to manipulate a value before it's used by Pulumi. I mentioned, Pulumi is able to understand outputs. You don't have to use apply, but you can do it if you need to make some changes to a value before you put it in here. So let's take, for example, we're going to scenario here where we've got this storage account, and actually we don't want to take the storage account name from the list. What we actually want to do is name it after the resource group name and just stick stg on the end. I know this is in a loop and probably make a lot of sense, but ignore that for the minute. It's just an example. So what you want to do is this. But this bit, where it actually sticks the two together, is happening outside of Pulumi. This is just plain old Python string concatenation. And so this isn't going to work. This is have the same problem we saw a minute ago with everything else. It doesn't know how to stick an output and a string together. So what we can do is we can do the same as we did below. We can do, and you got apply in the method, use the lambda, put it in that variable, and then just use rg name plus close the brackets as well. And that will work. That will allow us to manipulate that. So if you need to use apply within a method, this sort of thing will work. And the thing to remember here is account name accepts an input string, which will actually accept an output string, which is why this works. Input string and output string are somewhat interchangeable. So this apply method still outputs an output string, as we discussed before. But rather than trying to stick it in a string field or whatever we did before, this is actually sticking it into an output field. And so it works. So we can do all the manipulation of this string we want to do in here as a string, and then we bundle it back up as an output and feed it in here. And that works because we're actually feeding it to a Pulumi resource. So if you need to do manipulation of things where you are able to accept the output still being an output, that's fine. You can do that here. And this will work. But there's also a simpler way. If we're just manipulating strings, then there's a couple of other methods we can use to actually make this a bit simpler to deal with. If you're doing something more complicated than that, you'll still need to use the apply. But what we can actually do, let's get rid of this, is instead of that, we can look in the Pulumi library and there is an output method. And what we can then do with that here is, we can then use a concatenate method. And this allows us to stick things together as strings. So we can do rg.name, comma, because each separate string is separated as a comma, and then we'll just use stg. And that will do the same thing. That's a bit simpler to read, makes life easier, and you can obviously append multiple strings. You can stick another one in here and do, rg.location. And that'll append that as well. So we'll end up with a resource group name, store stg West Europe, or whatever that's going to be. And that makes it a little bit easier if you're just manipulating strings and sticking things together. There's also another version where you can do output.format Same principle, but it uses the format function in Python, which you can use elsewhere if you want to. But essentially with that, instead of using those multiple things separated by a comma, we actually write our string, but we use this curly brace syntax. So we would do that, and then we would do rg.name. And what this is doing basically is it says take this string and then substitute what's inside these brackets for the first thing listed here. And we could do another one here. We could do 1, and we could do rg.location. And so that will substitute the first value into 0, the second value into 1, and so on. So you'll end up with resource group name storage West Europe, like we did before. So it's just a different method if you prefer. Some people find this easier to read and easier to deal with than using concatenate. Entirely up to you. With C#, the only one you get is the output.format method, but you can actually then use whatever method you like within that. It still works. So yeah, that's just 2 helper methods that make it a bit easier if all you're trying to do is manipulate some strings. And it's really quite common to have a scenario where you are looking to use the output of a different resource, but amend it slightly, add something to the end of it, whatever, and you want to go through this process. This makes it a bit simpler. So that's pretty much it for apply. It's a little complicated, and obviously it's not something you have to deal with something like Bicep or Terraform, because within those languages, every bit of code in there is Terraform or Bicep. There's nothing else within there. Whereas with Pulumi, you've obviously got this native programming language you're working with, which doesn't necessarily understand Pulumi in some areas. And so it's one of the compromises you have to make to be able to work in that imperative language with a more declarative approach. And it does take a little bit to get your head around, but hopefully once you've used it a few times, it'll make sense. I'm going to put a few links in the notes below the video with some more detailed explanations of how this works. There's the Pulumi docs. There's also a really good document written by Lee Briggs, who was one of the engineers on Pulumi. I think he's left now, but he wrote a good article on that, and I'll put that link in. Have a read of those. But really, I'd suggest just try it out in your code and see what works, and hopefully it'll make some more sense. If it still doesn't make sense, please ask a comment in the ask a question, in the video, and I will be more than happy to answer those and hopefully make that clearer. But yeah, a little bit of a tough concept, especially for us non-developers. It took me a while to get my head around to start with, but hopefully it makes sense why you need this for this slightly different way of writing code. Okay, well, thanks for watching. I hope you found it useful, and I will see you next week.